I'm alone at the board when every line breathes at once. Lamps bloom like a field at dusk. Chords tremble under my hands. A woman whispers, "Are they here?" From a number that traces to an empty lot, I say operator, and every mouth in town answers, disclaimer. Historical account from the 1938 broadcast night, presented for accuracy. Details retained. The cordboard sits like a polite animal until it decides not to. Tonight it warms under my palms the way bread does in an oven you forgot was on. It's 2 toll trunks on the left, 8 locals across, party lines down the curve, every lamp a small house asking for a voice. I clocked in at 7:55, took a pencil, and told myself to enjoy the quiet. It lasted 3 minutes. At 8:02, the studio carrier steadied on the monitor, and the radio in the lobby slipped into dance music, soft and busy, like nights when the city pretends to be a hotel. Footsteps, ice tongs, a bell 3 rooms away. A man asked for the theater. A girl giggled from a party line. A pharmacist told me, as if I'd asked, that cough syrup sells out before real winter. I wrote times with the neatness the chief likes, and tore my fingernail on a cord spring. Paper over it. Keep moving. At 8:12, a long-distance lamp winked with the lazy confidence of out-of-town money. "Morristown to Newark," I said, and the caller sighed like he'd finally reached the counter. "Put me through to my brother," he said. Then it gave me a number I knew to Wellman always give brothers when they mean to say, "Anyone who is me, but steadier." I plugged, listened for clear, and slid the sleeve home. The board purred, content. Then the first odd one, a deadline ringing. Lamps don't lie, but they do misbehave. Line for lit, no cord in it, and stayed lit like a child holding its breath. I touched the tip with my nail habit, silly, and the lamp dimmed a hair and came bright again. Party lines do that when someone tests the lever with a worried finger. "Operator," I said into the cup, cheerful. Breathing answered, then static, the far kind, the kind that brings its own weather. The lobby radio cut to a voice that walked instead of sang. I couldn't hear words, only the gait of it, careful and urgent. Lamp 6 bloomed. Lamp 2 followed. A little run of yellow down the row, then red on the toll. I worked both hands without thinking. Chords on muscle memory, answers in that calm voice were paid for.
Prater.
Operator. The board warmed a degree like it had leaned toward a fire. Calls stack in flavors. You can tell by the first word which one you're holding. Mothers, young men, drunks, polite people, losing their politeness. Tonight it was, "Do you hear it? Is it everywhere? Say it again." I asked the questions we asked, "Number, please." "Party, please, town," and got answers that weren't numbers at all. The board hummed. The room got smaller. At 8:20, a woman whispered there, saying it on the radio from a kitchen that clinked like enamel and spoons. I heard the broadcast bleed under her, an announcer fighting a crowd, the hiss that says live. I asked who she wanted, and she said anyone. My pencil rolled down its groove and tapped my wrist. The chief's chair sat empty by the door, a coat hanging over its back like someone would be back in a minute. The board breathed louder. I touched the monitor key, and the studio carrier poured into my left ear, the way you do when you need context, even if you don't want it. The voice on the program said a place name and then cylinder of metal, the way a person says a word they have only read. My lamps went up like a room when someone says fire, not from heat, from air. "Operator, operator, please, my sister." I don't like the idea of cities as one animal, but the board makes a case. Tonight it opened 2 eyes and looked at me. Trunks busy, toll flutter. Local I don't trust ringing on its own. I breathed with it and counted in my head when I felt my hands want to. Hurry, 1, 2, 3, plug sleeve operator. My pencil made a notch in the pad where I'd been writing neatly. I didn't fix it. At 8:27, a voice from a number I knew belonged to a warehouse said, it's very close to the mouthpiece, "Tell me which way they're coming." The lamp for that line stayed lit, 3 breaths after he hung up. By 8:30, the chief came in hard and quiet, coat half on, tie wrong. He took the sideboard without asking, and the 2 of us worked like we were rowing a boat in a rain you can't see through. He gave me his map township names in pencil, trunk notes in the left margin end. I slid it under my pad where I could touch the paper and think of roads. Party line beat well, families came alive all at once like geese. I split them with my thumbnail on the cord collar, the trick you learn when people forget how to share. One at a time, I said, patient as a nurse. An old man called somebody a fool and knocked his receiver twice the way farmers do when they want to be the loudest. Behind it, faint and bright like lightning that didn't belong to any cloud, the broadcast bled through, a field described as if it were right outside the exchange. Cross lines are like dreams. You can't prove them to anyone who wasn't there. Tonight, I got a child's whisper under a toll trunk, clear as glass. Mama says, stay in the cellar. I looked at the lamp and it belonged to a meatpacking office. I looked at the clock and felt a minute buck under my feet like a plank on a dock. The chief saw my eyes and said, without looking up, bleed. He meant it kindly. He meant keep working. The toll from Morristown came back hot enough to feel in the left hand. The brother needed the brother. Everyone needed someone. Put people together who hadn't spoken in a long time and didn't remind them of the reasons they'd stopped. The cord sleeves shined with the sweat of the city. The boards would smelled warm and a little sweet. The room's air smelled like cloth and breath and the heat that voices make. At 8:36, the lobby radio went briefly to music, and the lamps lulled half a beat, as if the city had blinked. Then someone shouted on the program, and every line on my board lit in sympathy, like a field of birds lifting at once. The chief said, we don't have enough hands, in the voice people use for weather. I called the second shift and the third. They would come when the streetcars let them. We worked the space between now and then. A line I had marked dead when I came on the empty lot number rang with a sound I don't like, a tone that doesn't live on our gear. I answered anyway because that's the job, operator static answered. Then a voice pitched wrong by distance or fear. Are you listening? Yes, I said because it was true. Then tell me, are they real? I heard the metal breath of a radio too close to a mouthpiece and the smaller breath of someone trying not to cry. Number please, I said, because that's the only door I have. We started logging remarks not because it would help the lines, but because it helps your head. The chief penciled rumor of evacuation and underlined it. I wrote warehouse voice, asks direction, and wished I could draw it like weather on a map. On Local 7, 2 boys laughed, the way boys laughed when a teacher's back is turned, then went quiet, and one of them said, no, really, look. I didn't want to imagine what he thought he saw. I kept my fingers on the cords. 1, 2, 3. Plug. At 8:42, a woman said a name that belonged to an undertaker and then hung up. The fast, embarrassed way people realize they've asked the wrong person for the right comfort. My board took that small grief and buried it under a toll request from a hotel and a local to a mother-in-law. The city stacked itself the way it always does, important on top, then ordinary, then important again beneath. The monitor key buzzed my jaw and I resisted it. The chief flipped his and winced, like he'd taken a bright light in the face. They're doing news bulletins, he said, not angry, just tired. It's theater, he said. Theater in the tone a person uses when theater is the only tool left, and also the wrong one. He shoved a candy into my hand and the paper crinkled. I put it on my tongue hole because sometimes sugar is a better idea than a thought. By 8:47, every trunk lamp was a pulse. The dead lot line rang again, and this time the voice didn't ask me anything. It said like it was reading from a page, they're walking. The word stepped down the cord into my arm and stood there. At 8:49, the dead lot line lit again, like a bad idea you keep having. It wasn't our ring. A ring is a proper, confident buzz that belongs to this room. This was a thinner sound, a ring-down tone from somewhere older, as if a distant board had leaned on us by mistake. The lamp held steady, not flirting. I touched the key with 2 fingers. Habit says you ground yourself to the work and said operator. Static breathed. Then a voice you get from basement stairs. You hear them? Said number please, because that's the door we have. The lamp stayed lit 3 breaths after the click that said he'd left. The chief flicked his eyes toward my row. You've got a hot phantom, he said, not looking up from his tolls. Wire chief. I rang plant on the back key. The wire chief answers like a man halfway down a ladder frame. I gave him the pair street lot, no subscriber, still ringing. Third time, he grunted a small yes, the kind that means he's already chalked our number on his sleeve. I heard him rubbing a fingertip across a coil somewhere in the next room, and then he said batteries clean. Pairs open at your block, no station. He tapped something metal that came through the line like rain on a radiator. You're reading ghosts. Cross, I offered. He said, not if it's that clean. He let the silence work a second like a good barber letting a mirror do the talking. You'll get bleed tonight. He added because naming the weather helps. Network's hot. People are hugging their sets. Keep going. He hung up with a soft wooden sound that told me he'd put the handset down with his shoulder already turning. The lobby radio muttered into music, then to a man reciting street names like a rosary, then to a different man who apologized and said the first man was not official, then to silence that begged to be believed. Lamps flared like fish in shallow water, bright and gone, bright and gone. I worked in threes to call my hands. 1, 2, 3 plug. 1, 2, 3 sleeve. The board warmed until the varnish gave a faint, sweet smell, the way a church pew does when too many coats and bodies sit on it at once. Long lines rang down from a neighboring office, little bells we only hear on busy nights asking us to take overflow. You got room there, girl asked, polite under pressure. We've got lamp, I said, which is the same as yes. She slid us 4 and 4 became 6 because trouble breeds in even numbers. I could feel the weight of other cities at my fingertips, voices from towns with different dust, each asking if ours saw what theirs said they saw. Party line B tried to become a meeting. I split them again with my thumbnail and said, 1 at a time, darlings. A boy said he could see something over the rail yard like a smudge. His aunt told him to come to her house now. A man named a church like he was offering me a way out. The woman with enamel bowls came back to say she could smell something that wasn't her stove. I told her to turn the radio down and the gas off and call her sister. She said operator like my name and hung up, still breathing in my ear. At 8:55, the chief's second shift pushed through the door, eyes wide, sleeves already rolled. We didn't stop to greet them. You don't greet someone rowing to your side in the rain. We took the farboard, and it took a swallow of room temperature water from a paper cup that tasted like its own patience. How many on trunks? The chief asked. All, the second said. He took the music off in the lobby with a click that sounded like the first sensible thing all night. The deadlock lamp brightened again, as if someone had shielded it with a hand and then taken that hand away. I answered because you do. Operator. The voice came like it was speaking through a wool coat. You can hear me. It wasn't a question. Number, I said again, softer, because sometimes softness pries a door that hardness can't. Tell me where they are, he said. Behind his mouth you could hear the ragged cloth of radio static, the hiss of a set whose guts were showing. You've got the network, I said, not unkind. This is the exchange. Then tell me if it's true, he said, and the lamp stayed lit after his last word like it wanted one more. Ground it, the chief said without glancing. I rode the key and cut the stick with a tiny serve of my thumb. The way you straighten a crooked picture frame without making a ceremony of it. The lamp died the right way this time. My hands believed me again. The board made a small, appreciative click in its throat, like an animal that finds your pace. 9 o'clock is when an ordinary night decides which way it will lean. Ours leaned toward the kind of busy you remember later in a list of 5 important nights when you're trying to explain to a young operator. Why you keep another pair of shoes at work? Hospital asked for priority on 3 trunks, gave them 2, and told them we'd push the 3rd when it cleared. The police line requested a ring down we could not spare, and thanked us anyway. The railroad asked if we would please not patch panic into the yardmaster. I said I would try. We both knew I would fail twice. We keep message received cards for nights like this, little rectangles where you scribble what a person wanted in case the line dies before their want reaches its target. I filled 4 in a minute. Tell Mama I'm fine. Send Henry. Lock the back. I'm under the bar. None belong to me. All passed through my head and warmed the air and joined the room's hum. If you listen long enough, you can hear a city's heart in the transformer case on the baseboard. The wired chief slipped his head around our door, hair full of copper dust. He didn't come in. Men don't cross into our room unless they must. Open lot pair shows nothing on the frame, he said, ticking his eyes at my bad lamp. I'll hang a trap on it, he added, meaning a little coil to catch mischief and, then paused like he didn't want to tell a ghost story in a church. Might be a farm battery bleeding into the plant through a party spur. Might be, he said again, to please himself. The chief's pencil snapped, and he used the broken half without missing pace. Columbia says bulletin, he said, and somebody in the lobby put the radio back to life for 3 sentences that sounded official enough to let 3 lamps go dark. Then a different voice came on and made 2 other lamps light. If you want to know how much a city trusts, Work a switchboard during a broadcast. The trust moves like tide, makes the lights change temperament. A trunk to a news office rang down. The impatient, clipped way people who type talk when they're out of chairs. Line's dead, the copy boy said, and I could hear inks and bells behind him. Which line? I asked. The line to the police, he said, and knocked the mouthpiece with his ring. I sent him to a second number the sergeant had given us for exactly that problem. He said, "Bless you," like he was saying story. At 9:08, the dead lot lamp lifted a new color into itself. The faint orange that means a ring at the far end, back feeding into our lamp without a proper cradle. It's a lonely little hue. I've only seen it twice once, in a storm when a line came down on a fence, and once the night a bar burned quiet. I answered, "Because you don't punish a wire for a person's mistake." Operator, a child's voice this time. "Mama says we should stay in the cellar, but I can't hear her on our phone." Her breathing sounded like the slow whoop of a pump when it needs oil. "What's your number, honey?" I asked. She gave me a string of digits that belonged to a street we did not serve. On my pad, I wrote them anyway. The lamp went dark, mid-breath like a candle under a jar. I felt my mouth shape a prayer I don't say. The chief saw that and slipped me another candy without looking. "Hands," he said, a reminder to keep them doing. So I did. I put a woman to her sister. I set a man onto a church. I cut a boy away from a party line so he could hear his father say nothing on the other end. The kind of nothing that stops boys laughing for a year. The room filled with the small, honest sounds that keep a knight from lying to you. Cord tips, kissing jacks, sleeves riding home, the low talk of professionals who know which words cause which results. The broadcast bled in around the edges like light under a door, and I refused it. The city kept telling me what it needed with its hands, through wire, one bright circle at a time. At 9:12, the wire chief's trap snapped a tiny, satisfied click I could hear through the wood, and my bad lamp rested. Not off, resting. The kind of rest a child takes when you've convinced him the game is over, even if it isn't. I breathed with the board and let the room teach my heart its slower rhythm again.
Ow.
The chief scratched a note on his pad phantom, grounded and underlined it twice. That's when the toll lamp for the hotel downtown came in with a ring that didn't belong to us or to them. It stuttered like a coin catching a chute, then steadied, then poured a voice onto my desk that had no business being on a toll. "Are you listening?" The same man, or a different one born of the same air, close enough to my mouthpiece that I could hear the wet sound of his fear. I said operator, because that's the only word that keeps me from answering questions I cannot. He exhaled into my ear like a cellar door opening and said, with the careful diction of a person who wants you to take down every letter, "They're walking on the road that doesn't have a name yet." The lamp stayed lit 3 breaths after he hung up. The hotel toll settled into my palm like a bird that didn't know it had landed. I could hear lobby marble and a bell that never learned to be quiet, front a clerk said, and then the same thin voice that had come from the empty lot poured over his words. "Are you listening?" The clerk didn't react. He was asking for long distance to Philadelphia. We were hearing 2 different nights through the same hole. "Patch your guest, please," I told the clerk, and cut the stranger clean with a short touch of the key. The toll lamp stayed warmed a shade longer than its manners allow, as if it were thinking. The chief slid me a look that meant treat it like weather and scribbled hot PBX on his pad. He didn't say hotel switchboards leak when frightened. Didn't have to. The program in the lobby hiccuped into a voice that called itself official and then apologized for the part you were meant to find frightening. 3 lamps relaxed to finger width. 2 others flared in the way people flare when told not to worry. I took a woman to her brother and let their silence do the work. I took a boy off a party line and put him to a house with a basement. I put the undertaker through to no one because the number he wanted had always been wrong, and tonight he'd decided to try it anyway. The wire chief leaned in the frame again, copper dust in his eyebrows like a bad mood. "I hung a trap on your lot pair," he said, keeping his voice for me alone. "If it rings again, I'll hear it on my bench." He hesitated. "Plant out West reports farm batteries bleeding into fence wire. Cows won't like it. Neither will we." He didn't smile. He shut the door with the careful courtesy men use in rooms that aren't theirs. 9:15. The switch took on that sorest feel, cords getting heavier without actually weighing more. I breathed in 3s when my fingers tried to beat time they couldn't keep. 1, 2, 3 plug. 1, 2, 3s leave. Party line be calmed because a matron decided it would and told the farmer to wait his turn like a decent Christian. I wanted to send her chocolates and a pension. The deadlock lamp stayed honest until it didn't. A thin orange halo rose in it. A back-fed ring like a coin thinking about falling. I grounded with a touch and answered because that's the job. Operator. The voice came as if it had walked up from the dirt. They're on the road that doesn't have a name yet. His breath hit the mouthpiece and made a small wet sound. Where are you calling from? I asked, patient. From where it will be, he said, and the lamp held after his click like it was listening to itself. Note it, the chief said. Pencil already halfway there. I wrote unnamed road. Same man, hotel PBX leakage. Empty lot returns. Writing takes the superstition out. On Local 3, a woman whispered a church address and asked if the lights were on there. I told her I couldn't see the church from the exchange. She laughed at herself in a small, kind way and hung up. A patrol desk called on the ringdown and asked us to route non-emergency to the station house, not the yard. They're calling about lights in the sky, the sergeant said, bored like a man folding laundry. Send me people, not stories. I wrote his second number big, where my tired eyes would find it. At 9:20, the program voice apologized again for theater, and then doubled down on it with a bulletin. The chief lifted his monitor key, winced, and killed the lobby radio with a motion that was almost a blessing. They're doing news, he told me, and then lower, and calling it not news. The room answered with cord tips kissing metal, and the hum a transformer makes when a city leans on it. I took a call from a farmer with wind in his line that sounded like cloth on a washboard. He asked for the highway patrol. Said there were people on the new cut that wasn't open yet, walking where the fill dirt hadn't settled. Said they moved wrong. I asked wrong how, the kind of wrong you can put on paper, said, like they kept meaning to stop and didn't. I sent him to the patrol and logged construction road trespass, walking. The chief underlined construction and tapped the pad twice. 2 of our third shift girls came in, cheeks bright with cold and streetcar. They took the far board and put their hairpins in with one hand while they worked with the other. You can trust a room again when there are 4 of you. The air got human. Someone near the back opened a paper-wrapped candy, and the sweet smell cut straight through static fear and varnish. The empty lot lamp stayed quiet long enough to make me think it had learned manners. Then the hotel toll rang with the wrong ring again, and I took it, bracing. Round, the clerk said, voice clipped clerkly. Second voice, my stranger, laid itself over the line neatly. They're passing the place where the brickyard will be. Different town geography than mine. Same tone. The clerk asked for Philadelphia again, oblivious. I patched him, cut the stranger, and wrote brickyard on the pad. The word felt heavy on the pencil. The wire chief's trap ticked once on his bench. I heard it through wood like a fingernail on a violin string. He knocked our door and gave me the smallest nod to say he'd felt it too. I nodded back. In rooms like this, nods are first language, words second. 9:28. A long-distance trunk from the newsroom came through with the sound of a lot of people typing wrong. We need City Hall, the copyboy barked. Lines are soft. I gave him his circuit. He said bless you again like a man stealing time. Behind him I heard an editor tell the room to stop writing ducks as swans. It's a good sentence. I remembered it so I could tell it later. The child who'd spoken about the cellar came back, not a child this time, but a line that had belonged to her. Operator. A man's voice. If somebody calls from 2-18J and says the name Mary, you put them through to me here. He gave me his number like he was handing me a baby. I wrote it down because writing is the only promise I can keep. The lamp stayed lit after he hung up, and then went dark, embarrassed. A smell like hot dust slid under the door, the wire chief burning a fingertip on a coil he should have left alone. He cursed soft, the way religious men curse. I smiled without wanting to. The chief saw it and let his shoulders drop a fraction. We were still people. The board was still wood. The night would pass, the way nights always do, when you keep the machine honest. At 9:30 for the program put on music again, and a lot of lamps went polite. People thanked me for nothing in particular. A man apologized to his brother for a fight from 1931. A woman told me her kitchen clock had stopped and then started. She wanted me to know, in case that meant something. I told her it meant she should wind it tighter. She laughed and said I sounded like her mother. The dead lot lamp brightened for the last time that hour, and held steady without color as if it had learned how not to leak, and then offered me the sentence like a letter slid under a door. "You hear them now," said "Number, please," and underneath my voice I heard a road with no cars on it. The long, bare sound of a brand new surface waiting for a first set of tires that would come next spring. "They are walking where the county hasn't named it," the man said. "Slow, careful. Then don't worry, by morning they will be fields again." The lamp stayed lit long enough to put the words on the page, then it went decent dark. "Plant?" the chief asked, not looking up. "Plant," I said, and rang the wire bench. "Your trap caught him," the wire chief told me, pleased in a way men get when a device behaved. "It's a farm battery on a dead spur, tied into a fence a block from your lot. Whoever's biting that wire is hearing your voice." He paused. "Or believing they are." He meant it kindly. He meant to keep working. I did. I put the farmer back to the patrol to tell them his walkers had turned into men with flashlights looking for cows. I put the hotel clerk to Philadelphia and heard him say hello to a voice that didn't answer. I put the woman with the enamel bowls through to her sister and listened to two kitchens make the same noise at the same time until they remembered how to be two kitchens again. At 9:42, when the board took a breath, the chief and I looked at each other over the top row of lamps and let our mouths almost smile. The room smelled like candy paper, varnish, and the faint iron of hot wire. The program in the lobby stayed off. The city stopped acting like one animal and went back to being 10,000 small ones. We were still busy hospitals, trains, a man asking me how to spell Martian so he could write it correctly before his wife got home, but the trouble had changed size. The transformer's hum shifted down a half step. The girls at the far board laughed once at nothing and clapped a hand over their mouths, embarrassed, then went back to work. I took one more call from the lot because I wanted to be the one who did. "Operator." Silence, then a click like a careful man putting down a glass. The lamp didn't hang on after. It did what lamps are supposed to do. It went out when the person went away. I breathed with the board and put my hand flat on the varnish to feel its temperature. Warm, but less. Ash. The chief wrote "ordinary" on his pad and drew a box around it. He tapped the pencil twice. We both watched the lamps to see if the night agreed. Down the hall, the lobby radio woke itself a notch and then went still, like a mouth opening to speak and deciding the room didn't need it. By 10 o'clock, the board had the flushed, post-run look of a horse walked cool. Lamps still worked, but they'd stopped trying to tell a single story. Hospitals asked for lines that stayed theirs. The railroad wanted the yardmaster back from rumor. Patrol reminded us a second time to use the station house, not the yard. Ordinary work, the kind that keeps a city stitched. The chief set a mug on the heater cover and wrote "ordinary" again, darker. "Keep your hands slow," he said, which is another way of saying don't let the room borrow your pulse. On the far panel, the third shift girls found their rhythm 2 chords in each hand. Sleeves riding home with that clean little click that means you haven't forced anything. We began to get apologies. People called back the numbers they'd worn out an hour ago and said, "I'm sorry." Never mind like they'd knocked on a stranger's door in the rain and realized it was the wrong house. I took a woman to her sister and listened to the two of them laugh at themselves with the fierce relief that makes people kind. A boy asked how to spell cylinder because his father wanted the word right for the letter he was going to send to the paper. I told him, then spelled silly for him too because he asked, and we both smiled into the cups. Plant sent a runner with a card pencil smudges where the wire chief had leaned his hand. Trap. Stray farm battery on party spur. Backfeed via fence. Cleared. He'd underlined "cleared" twice and added, almost sheepish for a man who hates poetry, "Everyone is hugging sets." I pinned the card to the corkboard where we keep weather and weddings. The hotel PBX calmed to the proper clerkly ring. When it misbehaved once, I answered with 2 words the wire chief would have liked: ground. "Please." The clerk flipped his key, the lamp cooled. Our lines met like people shaking hands after speaking at the same time. In the lobby, someone turned the radio back onto music that had no opinion about Martians, and you could feel the room, our room, the city. Even the board decided that melody was a better use of the hour. We kept at it. A doctor rang for the exchange in the next town. I could hear his pencil beating time on his desk blotter. I gave him his toll and imagined him stopping the pencil on the first ring there. A factory asked for the night watchman and then remembered they'd fired him last spring. They laughed because the alternative was unkind. A church line rang, and a janitor answered with a voice like a winter coat. He wanted the police to know his vestibule light had flickered, and then minded its business. I passed the message as if it carried weight and watched the lamp go out without hanging on. Party line BAR 12 families had turned into a proper parlor by then. A woman told her neighbor that the dog had finally lain down. The farmer who'd pounded his receiver earlier asked if anyone had extra coal. The matron said she did, and her voice ran across the wire like bread passed down a pew. I split them when they overlapped, but gently now, the way you slide a saucer under a cup so it doesn't scald a table. 10:20. The chief went down the row, touching the top of each supervisory lamp, with his fingertip like counting heads in a classroom. Present, present, present. He paused at my empty lot, jack quiet, decent. No orange halo and let his finger rest there a second longer than habit. Plant says your ghost was a fence, he said. I'll take a fence over a ghost. I nodded, though I kept the pad where I'd written road without a name. Notes don't change because explanations arrive. They just stop asking to be read out loud. I tucked the pad under the map so my hands could find paper without finding that line first. We had one last busy a hospital requesting 3 trunks for half an hour to chase their own calls down the tree end. Then the board exhaled. You learn the sound of it. A transformer darkening half a note. Cord sleeves cooling. The room's breath making itself heard again under voices. I pulled my monitor key for the first time in 20 minutes. The radio sang something foolish and content. I hung the key back like I was putting a lid on a pot. A farmer's wife asked me whether she should turn the set off and go to bed. That usually works, I said. She laughed once and hung up like a woman who'd just solved her own riddle. A man at the hotel thanked me for the Philadelphia patch and told me to tell my supervisor I deserved a raise. I said I would, then did, and the chief said, I'll raise you a cup of coffee, and poured 2 fingers of brown water that tasted like the idea of coffee. We drank it anyway. At 10:40, the wire chief appeared one last time, wiping his hands on a cloth that used to be a shirt. Fence boy's quiet, he said. He pulled his spur and he'll find out in the morning he can't ring the county with a cow. He sniffed, the way men do when they've made the world better by half an inch. You girls kept it from getting theatrical, he added, which from him was a medal. He left the door open an inch so we could hear the plant hum low, reassuring iron. Calls tapered to the kind of night work you can tell on a postcard. A woman asked me the time because her kitchen clock had given up and she didn't like the look of its hands. Told her. 2 boys asked each other if they'd really been scared. They both lied politely. Party line B said goodnight in order, something that had surely never happened before, and someone, maybe the matron, maybe the farmer, tapped the hook twice in a way that sounded like applause. At 5:11, the chief leaned back for the first time since 8 and rubbed the ridge the headset leaves on a skull. You all right, he asked, eyes on the board. I'm all right, I said, eyes on my hands. He nodded, like we'd traded passwords. On my pad I wrote ordinary under his ordinary and boxed mine once. 2 boxes felt like a fence we'd built. The deadlocked pair stayed obedient. I answered it one more time anyway. Not because the lamp asked, because I did. Operator. The line gave me the pure, generous silence of good wire, serving no one. The sound we build rooms like this to carry. I let it ride a second and cut it myself, a courtesy to the night. At 11, the chief took the lobby radio and turned its volume down to a neighborly whisper. Dance music came back across the tile like a broom in a clean hall. He hung his coat on the proper hook and said, not to me and not to himself, it was theater. Then, as if correcting his own homework, it was radio. He tapped the transformer case twice with his knuckles polite. Spacetown, the plant answered with its steady note. We stayed until midnight because you never leave aboard too soon after a storm, even a storm made of voices. The girls laughed once at an inside joke, and then remembered where they were. I mended a frayed cord with tape like a nurse, putting a bandage where only she noticed. The city settled into being 10,000 animals asleep with one ear up. When the relief came, I signed the sheet with a hand that still wanted to count to 3. I hung my headset on its peg and let my skull remember its shape. The chief boxed his ordinary again and drew a small arrow to tomorrow. Same time, he said, and I nodded. 'Cause there's always another night, and the board will want someone to admire its manners. Outside, the street had that washed, just-drained feel, even though the sky had stayed dry. A delivery man rolled a cart past, bells soft against the handle. Down the block, a radio hummed behind a curtain at the level you use when you've scared yourself and now you want company without a face. I walked home with the city in its proper pieces, one window lit, one cat on a step, one policeman rubbing his hands and thinking of coffee. On my kitchen table, I set the pad down and put a saucer over the top page the way you cover dough while it rises, to keep the air from taking what it wants. I didn't read the line about the road. Lines don't need you after they've been written. They just need a place to cool. I slept. When I woke just before dawn, the radiator ticked to polite notes in the dark. I knocked twice back on the bed frame without thinking courtesy to a room that had kept its hum, then smiled at myself. Somewhere, a farm boy was finding out his fence no longer called the county. Somewhere, a hotel clerk was telling the next shift reports had been exaggerated. The wires lay quiet, along the poles like rope left by men who know they'll need it again. And the board, I knew, was already breathing small in the empty office. Lamps dim. Cords resting like hands in a lap waiting for someone to say, "Operator," and mean, "I'm listening," and then begin again. I woke to the kind of morning that pretends nothing ever happens. Milk gray, quiet, the street washing itself in slow light. My skull still wore the headset like a hat you forget you're wearing. I boiled water, burned the first toast, and knocked twice on the kitchen doorframe out of habit. The apartment answered with the polite noises of pipes and heat, the way a room thanks you for keeping it ordinary. At noon, the wire chief sent a runner. "Come see the frame." He meant it like an apology and a tour. In plant, he stood in his kingdom of copper and cloth, the main distributing frame rising like a book with all its pages open. He touched our pair with 2 fingers as if checking a pulse. "See," he said. "Open at the block, no station. Your lamp shouldn't have known that wire existed." He showed me his trap. A little coil hung like a fishing lure, pencil note clipped under it. "Lot, PAIR watch." When he rang, "I heard it here," he said, tapping a bakelite headset with the tenderness of a man who approves of one object more than most people. Wasn't our ring. Magneto somewhere. Farm battery, fence, anything that likes current and company. He smiled without smiling. Half the county wired itself before we got here. He walked me to the bench where his hands go black and clean again every hour. On a shelf sat a cigar tin with a hole punched in the lid, lamp cord frayed through and tied in a hopeful not a child's idea of electricity. "Found this a block off your lot," he said. Tin was tucked in a fence post. Lead wrapped sloppy. Cow rubs it, post hums. Our plant sniffs it, and your lamp blushes. He twitched the cord, and the tin gave a shy, metallic sigh. "Somebody thought they'd make a phone from air," he added, not unkind. He showed me the spur cut, the porcelain insulator flexed just so, the little glass rabbit-eared cup that kept rain from starting conversations we didn't want. "You had 30 towns on the same breath last night," he said, brushing copper dust off his sleeve. "Wires will pass anything if you lean on them hard enough. So will people." He put the tin in a drawer. We cooled it. On the way out, he stopped by the map on Plant's wall. A penciled line ran through a rectangle of empty cutoff proposed. "County keeps promising this," he said, tapping the line. "No name yet. They'll call it something they can say with coffee in their mouth. Oak, river, veterans, they always do." He didn't look at me when he added, "A farmer phoned the patrol last night about walkers on the new cut. Men with lanterns, lost cows, nothing from Mars." He said Mars like a word he'd met once in a book and decided not to invite back. I walked the block by the exchange because you can't shut a night in a drawer. You have to give it fresh air like laundry. The lot that had wrung me sat quietly under a seam of frost. Fence posts leaned the way old men lean when they tell a story twice. A survey stake stubbled up near the ditch with a cloth tag pinned to it, RW in pencil, for right-of-way. If you stood at the corner and squared yourself just so, you could picture the road, the bend, the cut, the first set of tires next spring. For now, it was dirt with ideas. A boy trotted past with a milk crate and a grin you only get the day before Halloween. He dragged a stick along the fence, and the wire sang a single bright note, not a ring-just wire, remembering it as metal. He looked at me and said, "You gonna be listening tonight?" Said, "Yes," and he shrugged, satisfied, the way people are when the world behaves to plan. At the hotel, the clerk recognized my coat and pushed a register at a guest with the speed of a man overperforming normal. "Philadelphia got their man," he told me, not stopping his hands. Everybody else got their nerves back. He leaned and lowered his voice. We had a bell go off in the switch twice with nobody on it. He tapped his own PBX like a horse. Ground cured it. He meant it like an apology for believing a lamp. Back at the exchange, the chief had stuck last night's pad to the corkboard with a pin through ordinary and a coffee ring like a seal. "Plant found your fence," he said, amused to be right. He pointed to a new slip the patrol had left. "Nitrogen moan incident on County Cut. Men searched for cattle," in pencil. Somebody had added, "Name TBD." The chief boxed that too. Likes words that promise small futures. Between 3 and 4, we made calls that felt like sweeping. We rang back the woman with the enamel bowls to remind her to turn her gas on. She laughed, embarrassed and sweet. We called the farmer who had asked for the patrol and got his wife, who said the cows were home and her husband had slept badly and good. We called the undertaker because the chief said we might as well give him something to do. He thanked us, as if we'd delivered weather. A reporter came by with ink on his hand and humility in his pocket. "We're writing it light," he said. "No comfort in calling people fools." He asked how many calls we'd taken, and we told him none in all, which is the right number. He asked if anyone had truly seen anything. "Plenty," the chief said. Not the same thing. The reporter wrote same and not on his pad and underlined both. At dusk, the town put its lamps on. Switchboard adjusted its shoulders and remembered its manners. Kids sharpened their plans in the alley. Soap, string, a door that only pretends to latch. The church bell set at 7 with the same patient interval it used in summer. I put my headset on, and the room made the grateful sound it makes when you've hung your coat up in the right place. The wire chief tapped the transformer case with 2 knuckles polite. "Spacetand," the plant answered with the kind of hum you don't notice when you're tired from honest work. "If your lot rings tonight," he said from the door, "it'll be because a person asked it to." He paused. You can tell a person no. He left like men in his trade leave, standing up quiet, a door laid down on its latch. We logged our first calls, the grocer's wife to her sister, a boy to a boy about a mask, a streetcar man to the barn to say he'd be late by 1 run. Party line begreeted one another like a congregation that had agreed to argue only about pie. The board warmed the right amount. The varnish smelled like wood again instead of worry. Around 8, the lobby radio tried a clever joke, and the chief spared it by turning the volume down until it behaved like furniture. My bad jack sat decent and blank. I answered at once anyway because habit is a leash that walks you home. "Operator." The silence I got back felt correct wire that wanted nothing. Room that asked for nothing. Night that would take messages and not ask us to invent new kinds of listening. I wrote a line to myself on the spare pad where nobody else reads. They were walking on the road that doesn't have a name yet. I boxed it lightly, not to keep it, just to know where it was if later my hand went looking. The board blinked at me like a well-fed cat. The chief poured coffee that tasted less like tap water. Girl on 3rd sniffed candy paper and laughed once at her own hunger, then took a call from a doctor and said yes, of course, with a steadiness that pushed my heart into the right part of my chest. Close to 9, a farmer's wife asked me if the cut would really be a road by spring. "They've already bought the signs," I said, which is as good as truth around here. "It'll have a name," she asked, like a person wondering if a baby will be christened. "Well," I said. She thanked me in the way people thank luck. We worked until the lamps told us it was bedtime for the part of town that sets milk out for cats. The board exhaled and rested its weight into the desk like a child asleep on a shoulder. I tapped the frame twice polite. Spaced hand the wood gave me its tiny note back, a sound like a fence staying a fence. The chief boxed ordinary one more time and drew a short arrow to tomorrow just to make the joke only he laughs at. On my walk home, the lot sat where a road will be, the frost line pushed back a yard by the day's weak sun. If I squinted, I could see the curve, the ditch, the brickyard somebody had whispered as a promise. The fence didn't sing when I ran my fingers along it, just made the small zipper sound wire makes when you ask it a question it doesn't answer. At my door, I put my palm flat and counted to 3 before I turned the knob. Not a ritual. A way to set the room's pulse before I brought mine in. In the dark, the radiator ticked twice the careful spacing of a plant that has decided for the moment to be kind. I answered it the way we answer everything, operator, which, most nights, is just another way to say yes, I'm listening. Halloween came easy, like a shirt you've worn, thin kids in paper masks. A wind that moved tricks down alleys, and left the grown-ups alone. By 9, the board had settled into porch checks and late streetcar calls. The bad jack from the lot stayed decent and blank, a square of wood behaving like wood. I touched it once anyway, a superstition with no teeth. Operator, it gave me good silence back, the kind you can rest your hand on. Party line be signed on one at a time like cousins arriving. Hello, Nora? Yes, I can see the moon. No, I don't think it's bigger and then. Clear and small between them, a girl said. 218J, please. That number woke something I'd pinned to cork with a promise. I split the line gently and said, Mary. There's a pause a person makes when a stranger says her name right. Yes, she said, the S lifted by a smile I could not see. I pulled the slip from behind the pad where I'd kept it. The man who'd told me to put any Mary from 21AJ straight through. I gave his number the respect you give paper you've carried a night and a day. The lamp answered like a door opening the correct way the first try. Hold, I told the girl, and she did the clean, obedient hold of someone who has spent a day in a house where adults are careful with their words. He came on breath first. Yes, I didn't announce. I bridged them and let the wire learn them by itself. A small clatter on her end enamel on wood then? Fine. He didn't speak for a second and let the relief climb down his ribs and find a chair. Then he said, I know, which is what people say when they mean thank you for being real. Their line went quiet in that good way, where rooms compare noises and decide they're the same house. They talked about nothing loud, a coal scuttle, a door that had learned to pull instead of push, the radio taken down to a whisper and then off. She mentioned a fence that had buzzed like a bee when the cow leaned wrong. He said he'd fix it. He didn't ask about walking roads or empty lots. He asked if the cellar light flickered. She said no, it held, and you could hear his throat put itself back where it belongs. While they were a pair, a county runner left a folded circular at our door zoning and such, the kind of paper that thinks it's boring and turns out to be a map. The chief slid it under my elbow with a finger on a line. Right-of-way approved for Brickyard Road, a name you can say with coffee in your mouth. There it was, the cut, the curve, the ditch, chinked and ready to be paved in spring. I set my palm on the paper to warm it, as if names take better when the hand agrees. On the bridge, Mary said, we stayed in the cellar anyway, he said. Good, she said. It was silly, he said, good. Again, because sometimes the shape of a word matters more than whether it's true. A chair creaked. Someone breathed. A door somewhere in their life found its latch. When they hung up, their lamp did what you want. All lamps to do it left at the same time they did. I wrote Mary gives Mr. Kept on my pad and boxed it once. Not a ledger. A thank you. The chief laid his pencil on my note and drew a second box like he was closing a picture frame. We took a few more Halloween smalls. A mother to a blanket-armed uncle, 2 blocks over. The streetcar barn, to the man whose shift had run long. Porch to porch thank you for candy bowls left out with honest instructions. You could feel the city returning itself to itself, a neighborhood at the right scale. When the music in the lobby tried to sell us an adventure, the chief turned it down to furniture again, and the room approved. Near the end of the hour, the wire chief leaned in, hair still holding copper dust like a halo he didn't believe in. He tapped the transformer case polite, Spacedan said. County posted it. Brickyard Road it is. He pointed his chin toward the map on our wall, already penciled with the name. See coffee safe. He let the door settle into its latch like a satisfied sentence. I went home past the lot, the future road now, only a seam of darker dark across a field. If you squared yourself the way he'd taught me, you could read the curve with your feet. The fence didn't sing. It breathed, quiet, wood and wire, in an arrangement the county would change soon enough. A boy in a paper mask trotted by, dragging a stick, and this time the wire kept its manners. At my own door I knocked twice polite, spaced though there was nobody on the other side but my kettle and a clock that would keep good time if I wound it. The radiator answered with 2 small ticks like a plant agreeing. Well. Lifted the pad on my table and wrote the name where my hand had kept a line for 2 nights. Brickyard Road. It wasn't poetry. It was enough. Some nights finish themselves and ask to be told. Some don't, and you let them keep their corners. We logged ours, folded our maps, and left the rest to spring. If a wire rings from an empty place again, I'll answer it, operator, because that's the door I have. But lately, when the board breathes and the lamps behave, I hear only what I'm supposed to. Wood, copper rooms in their proper sizes. A city, separate and together. A road with a name you can say without looking over your shoulder. Spring put a name on the dirt. A set post, strung line, poured the first ribbon. The map in our office got its ink. Brickyard Road. The county men planted the sign with a mallet rhythm that carried all the way to the exchange for taps. Pause. For taps like someone teaching a pole to stand its ground. People learned to say it with coffee in their mouths, the way the wire chief predicted. Children practiced it like a chant on their bikes. The lot that had rung me turned into an address with a mailbox, then a porch with a chair, and finally, a number our board could own with pride. When the new subscriber came in green paint, good shoes, calloused hands, I brought the form to the front myself. He gave his wife's name for the listing, squeezed the brim of his hat once, and asked whether the bills could arrive on the 1st. I wrote yes, as if yes could keep weather off a house. Plant retired the cigar tin to the drawer of curiosities, alongside a lightning-bubbled fuse. Porcelain insulator charred like toast, a handset chewed by a bored doggoned, labeled the card in the neat, amused hand, the wire chief kept for small legends. Fence telephone, October 38. When he showed it on tours, he told the story as plumbing, not poetry. Stray battery, open spur, a city leaning on its own nerves. It was enough. The hotel clerk shaved his part straighter and stopped over announcing long distance like a rescue. When his PBX burped once, he grounded it without calling us first. Then sent the bellman with taffy wrapped in wax paper because some men pass thanks the way others pass mail. For the girls, he said, and could not meet my eye, a man embarrassed by the memory of a lamp. Mary and her caller used their line the way careful people do in a county that remembers last fall. When he needed her, he asked, and she answered. I kept their slip a week longer than the rules allow, and then tucked it into the back of the pad like a pressed leaf. I didn't need it anymore. If you listened close on quiet nights, you could hear the hum of recognition when they met. By winter, the board's varnish remembered only ordinary hands again. We had our busiest storms, births, trains with opinions, but no more ring down from empty corners. When a lamp held 3 breaths too long, it was because of weather, or whiskey, or a boy who liked to hear his own hook tap. The transformer's note stayed honest. The lobby radio earned its place as furniture. Some Sundays I walked Brickyard Road on the way to nowhere, just to be sure a name sits right. The cut curved exactly where the survey flag had promised. A ditch kept its slope. The sign tilted, then learned better. If I squinted at the shoulder where the fence had once hummed, I could still see a seam where dirt remembered being a lot with an idea. I didn't touch the wire. Didn't ask for me. Once late, a truck passed slow, a ladder shimmering in its bed from streetlight to streetlight. The driver lifted 2 fingers from the wheel the way people who keep nights quiet do when they see one another off shift. I answered with 2 soft taps on the signpost. Polite, Spacedan felt foolish, and then fine. Rituals don't need witnesses. The wire chief retired the year after, palms clean and stained forever, and left us his pencil boxes and a joke he wrote on the back of the frame diagram. Wires are honest if you are. The chief in our room boxed ordinary on my last pad of that season and drew an arrow to next shift, because there is always one. The girls wheeled their chairs back and forth in a small choreography that kept our floor smooth as a pew. Every so often, a young operator would ask about the night with the radio, the way kids ask about whether they slept through. I told it like plumbing, not poetry. How trunks behave when a city leans. How party lines become parlor rooms. How a stray battery in a fence will convince a lamp it's a mouth. I said the only hero on our side of the board is pace. Count in 3s.
Yes.
Keep your hands slow. Let lamps tell the story they have, not the one you bring. I kept one habit. On the walk from my room to the board, I'd knock twice on the jam courtesy to the wire and to whatever was listening on the other side. The plant answered with its hum the way churches answer with cold air. Some nights the lobby radio remembered to be silent without being told. Some nights it didn't, and we forgave it. One late shift, months after the sign went up, Brickyard's number called the exchange by mistake fat, finger, or sleepy hand. I answered operator, and a woman laughed the kind that says, "A house is warm," man said. "Sorry, I meant to call the kitchen." I told her she'd reached the right person anyway. She said, "We're good," and we both hung up at once, our lamps behaving like lamps. If the lot ever rang from its old emptiness, I didn't hear it. If a road without a name ever became a voice again, it did it politely somewhere else. We collected the small dramas that make a city powdered sugar on a receiver. It's an apology for using the toll like a mirror. A doctor dictating a telegram that made no sense until the last word and let the big ones belong to the newspapers. You can keep a box of clippings if you like broadcast panic. Telephone floods. Clerk says calm returns, but it won't sound like the room. The room's music is chord sleeves riding home, and a transformer dropping a half note when a city relaxes. It's a matron on a party line telling a farmer to wait his turn, and a boy learning why a seller is not silly. It's a wire that used to bite a fence relaxing into its job. It's two soft taps on wood, spaced neatly, a courtesy everyone understands without vocabulary. Tonight, as ever, the board sits like a polite animal, lamps dim, cords draped like hands at rest. Somewhere out past the last pole, a road with a proper sign crosses a ditch and keeps going. If a lamp blooms, I'll count to 3 and answer it with the only word that matters here. Operator.